Speaking of mole brain,
Continue.
you guys want to hear a little bit about the Knights Templar?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, we've been waiting like 5 months.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of information, so just kidding. I have a little bit of information.
The Knights Templar.
Very interesting group of individuals.
Okay.
They were founded in 1118 AD.
Okay. Explain to me like I'm 5. All these people. So I'm just letting you know.
I mean, that's the year.
Yeah. I'm just saying like all the rest. Don't explain the year like I'm 5. I'm just explain all of this like I'm 5.
So 1118
Yeah.
in Jerusalem they were founded. And what happened was after the Crusades, the West or Europe took over Jerusalem. So they now had authority over Jerusalem, like they owned Jerusalem. And so what happened was the Catholic Church was really pushing like for pilgrimages to go to Jerusalem, the holy city. And if you did that, like it's like, yeah, you have a better chance of getting into heaven. And so they started doing this, but it's such a far journey that all these pilgrims a lot of them were robbed and killed because they had to bring all their money and stuff with them. And so then the Knights Templar was established. I believe started off with 8 dudes. And basically from day one to the end, their mantra was like that they were warrior monks. So they took a life of chastity and they lived in humility and poor, but their whole purpose was to protect the people on these pilgrimages.
They're ready to throw hands if they need to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that the Knights Templar were the ones that first established a central bank, central banking system.
Weird connection.
And so what they did was, so say you're coming from France and you're going all the way to Jerusalem.
Mm.
What you could do is with their bank, you would go give all your money to the bank in France and they would give you a note. And by the time you got to Jerusalem, you could turn in that note and get all your money back.
Mm.
So it was, instead of traveling with all their money and possessions and potentially being robbed and stuff.
Whoa. Literal banknote.
So it wasn't just like a currency thing. It was literally just trying to protect people and yeah, wow. Okay.
And from the sounds of it, it sounds like it started off with like really good intentions.
Yeah, of course.
But then the Pope got involved in it, and this is where the history gets a little like, Napoleon had this quote of like, whoever is the dictator or whoever writes the history, they're the ones that control the narrative, basically.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you have like the Pope and all these people on the sides of the Knights Templar, the history is going to be in favor of whatever the Pope says and whatever. But the Pope, he basically was like pumping all these favors towards the Knights and like didn't tax them the 10% to the church. But then they were gifted land, estates, businesses, like their wealth grew hugely within the reign of, it was about 200 years. So 1118, and then they were dissolved in 1312. And the ultimate like downfall of them was they were the wealthiest group or wealthiest society in like the world at that time. Mm-hmm. They owned all this estate, all this money. And the King of France actually borrowed a ton of money from the Knights Templar to fight the war against England. So he was like in debt to the Knights Templar.
Yeah.
Which this is where it gets a little like, well, then what's the true story? Because the end of it was the Knights Templar was dissolved and they were all killed and murdered because of the stories of them practicing in the dark arts, if you will.
Oh, goodness.
Like Eastern mysticism, all this crazy stuff, having idols, doing really not cool things with other people.
Yeah.
And, but it's just interesting that they were condemned in France by the French king because the French king was in so much debt. And what's the easiest way to get rid of all your debt is to dissolve the
kill the
organization.
People, your debtors. Yeah. I mean, you're in debt too. Yeah.
And so that's where it's just like, well, then what's the true story? Because whatever. But the guy that, he was like the leader of the Knights Templar. Oh, what was his name? Farts. I had it.
Reginald.
It was something like.
Is it Hughes de Payens?
It's like something It's like Gale de something.
Okay.
I forget.
That's all right.
Look up Knights Templar burned at stake.
Oh, he gets burned at the stake.
Yeah, so
Which?
he was burned at the stake. And the way the story goes is that they confessed to all these atrocities that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other side is like, well, they would torture them until they would confess. So it's just like, do you want to be tortured for the rest of your life or do you want to confess?
Yeah.
But apparently, this man, when he was being, what's his name?
Is it? I don't know how to say Jacques.
Jacques.
Jacques de Molay.
Yeah, Jacques de Molay. That's his name. Mole.
Mole.
Mole, 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 mole.
I'm gonna cut off that mole and make some guacamole.
But apparently, while being burned at the stake, he cursed the Pope and the King of France and said, "You will not live the rest of this year." And then, dead.
Gone.
It was like a month later, the Pope died.
Oh my gosh, of what?
I forget.
Suspicious causes?
I don't know. And then, at the end of the year, the King died as well. But where I got a little...
Yeah.
is that we talked about it before, but the Rosicrucians were established in 1313. The Knights Templar was dissolved in 1312.
No way.
Yeah. We talked about this. Doesn't
When?
matter.
Yeah.
But like the Rosicrucians means it's the rosy cross, like the red cross of like what the Knights Templar wore.
Yeah.
But I found a very weird connection with the fact that they were accused of practicing these dark arts, this ancient Egyptian mysticism, which is exactly what the Rosicrucians do, what the Freemasons do, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting was, so their symbol was a red cross, but it was 8-sided, so or 8 points, so like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until researching this that the pyramid is actually 8-sided. The pyramids of Giza, you know?
Okay.
It's not, so like one face, you know? It's like, it's actually inverted like that. So it's 8 sides to the pyramid.
That's not true.
It is true. Look it up, Lil.
Google it
What do you
right
mean
now.
it's not true? I looked it up. It's...
You wanted to Google
can
the
do it.
mold.
I've seen them in Despicable Me.
Mm.
They're inflatable.
But what I thought was interesting was the connection, or that cross, that 8-pointed cross, carried throughout just really strange organizations. One being Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a Freemason cross, 8-pointed, 8 points. The Nazis, same cross.
Weird.
Nazis.
And the story goes that the Knights Templar were so large that they had actually, hundreds of years before Columbus went to America, the Knights Templar were actually in America. And there's a conspiracy that they were finding ancient relics and bringing them to America to hide them.
That makes sense.
When the Knights Templar was dissolved, all of Europe was basically like, if you're a Knights Templar, you're in prison or you're dead.
Yeah.
The only country that did not do it was Portugal. And to this day, Portugal still has a hub for the Knights Templar. And what's interesting is that Christopher Columbus, I believe, is from Portugal, right?
I thought he was Spain.
Well,
Wasn't he?
He was contracted by Spain.
he was contracted by Spain, but he originally went to Portugal and he said, I'm going to go discover this new land that people have talked about. In Portugal, the theory is that they're like, why are you doing that? The Knights Templar had already been there.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, well, I'm just going to go to Spain. So he went to Spain and then went. But what's interesting is the sails on Christopher Columbus's ship was the symbol of the Knights Templar.
That is familiar in my head.
And so the theory is that he used those sails going to America because he knew that the natives there would recognize that,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't be as much as of a threat.
Yeah. They have friends coming.
Yeah.
Weird.
Don't yell at me. But what do you mean the Knights Templar went to America first?
That's a theory. It's a theory.
Told by what?
Multiple people. And they've had discoveries. There's like someone discovered like a tablet in I want to say it was like Ohio somewhere in the Midwest, but it was like this old Norse language tablet on this rock that this farmer discovered like in the early 1900s. And they're saying that that could have been one of the Knights Templar writing this stuff down in Norse.
Wow. So the Knights Templar went all the way into Norway and all of that stuff?
Yeah, they're from all over.
pilgrims?
So it's basically like a brotherhood of monks.
From France, though.
The founders were from France, but
Okay.
they ended up coming out from all over the world.
Oh,
so
I see.
like England, Russia, China, like everywhere. I don't think China, but like they're from all over. And so it was like pledging your allegiance to the Knights Templar, choosing a life of chastity, like you're a monk, basically.
Interesting. You did not dwell very long on the crusade thing. So you said the crusades ended and the Knights Templar was born. Is it suspected that a lot of those founders were members of the crusades?
Yeah, they were. I mean, all the originators of the Knights Templar were involved within the crusades.
Okay.
I wouldn't say like they were like the pivotal people, but like they're involved within it. But I don't know where I was going with this fully. There's so much mystery around the Knights Templar, especially with their imagery of like the cross and like how it's carried through the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Nazis, like all these different. Columbus used their same exact thing like over 300 years later when they were founded. You know,
Yeah.
it's just weird.
It is weird.